American Prosthetic Association, AOPA. Thank you all for being here today. I'm really excited. We're going to have a guest speaker join us a little bit later and give us a deep dive into sort of the political analyst's version of what a vehicle might be, what might look like for passage of the Medicare OMP Patient-Centered Care Act. Sam Miller will also be joining us shortly. So Sam and I just got back from House meetings. We were up on the Hill and have made our way back to be able to do this webinar today. So he's still getting set up, getting his computer set up so he can join us. So apologies for that second of delay, but I'm going to go ahead and get us started. If anybody has any thoughts about this general topic, like questions about what we mean when we say vehicle, I'm going to cover all of that. But I'm also just going to say that if you've ever attended a policy forum or Advocacy 101, or if you've ever seen that Schoolhouse Rock version of how a bill gets passed, I would love to say that that is the way we pass bills these days, but it is unfortunately not. In a previous Advocacy and Action webinar, we covered our committees of jurisdiction. We talked about the key committee members that are going to be responsible for helping us usher this piece of legislation across the finish line. We talked a lot. We kind of dug in that previous session into the mechanisms, the different ways that the committees work. So the subcommittees, particularly the health subcommittees for Ways and Means, and the health subcommittee for Energy and Commerce are our primary subcommittees. And then we have Senate Finance, the Health Care Subcommittee for Senate Finance. That's our primary subcommittee on the Senate side. And those are part of the bigger, obviously the bigger committees. In a perfect world, that Schoolhouse Rock, I'm just a bill dance would be the way that we would push this legislation forward. We'd ask for hearings. We would get markup. We would see a floor vote on our actual legislation. But that is not what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the other ways in which this piece of legislation could get passed. So I'll start by saying you might remember back in 2018 when the Bipartisan Budget Act was passed with the provision from, at that time, it was called the Medicare OMP Improvement Act. There was a provision in that bill to make the clinician's notes part of the medical record for purposes of medical necessity. That sentence that was added into the Bipartisan Budget Act was actually the passage of that provision of the bill. So in essence, we got that legislation passed through the vehicle of the Bipartisan Budget Act. So that's what we're talking about today, sort of these mechanisms, these larger categories of legislation that have multiple pieces that get added onto them as they move through the Senate or the House, and how that might be an opportunity for us to get provisions or the entirety of the Medicare OMP Patient-Centered Care Act passed into legislation. So I'll pause to see, do we have any questions yet? Just want to make sure I'm answering questions as we go along.
No, I'm not seeing any, but remember, if you do have questions, go ahead and pop those in the questions box, and actually get to those when she takes a break the next time.
Okay, great. Thank you, Joy. So yeah, ask your questions at any point in time, and then that way I can clarify as I'm walking, through this. We have a unique opportunity right now. So February 18th, there is expected to be a vehicle moving. It's a continuing resolution to fund the government. We were hopeful that if something were able to be passed in a bipartisan way, that we would be able to add non-controversial items to that bill. We, meaning Congress, would be able to work to add non-controversial items to that bill. We're watching it very closely. It's a crazy time up here. As I said when I first joined the call, Sam Miller and I just left the House, the Rayburn office building, where we met with Congressman Latta's office. It's, you know, it's a pretty interesting environment up there right now. There are a lot of hearings today on different pieces of legislation that are in the works, but nothing that's related to Medicare right now. But if there had been, we would be working to try to get our issue on the slate for those hearings. That's the kind of behind the scenes maneuvering that we're trying to do on a regular basis. At the same time, we're also trying to gain our co-sponsors for the bill. And you might say, well, you're talking about these other pieces of legislation, these bigger vehicles to pass the provisions, you know, to add our provisions into it and possibly pass that way. Why does it matter if you have co-sponsors? Well, the reason that it's so important to have a high number of co-sponsors, even if you're looking at these alternative methods of passing the bill, is because those are the people that are going to say, no, 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 yes, this has to stay. This piece of language that we're adding into this bill has to stay. So your co-sponsors get to be the cheerleaders and the harbingers, or the people that bring it to the finish line when you do get your legislation added into a larger vehicle. Again, referencing the Bipartisan Budget Act in 2018 is a really great, or 2017 rather, passed in 2018, is a really great example of how that all works. And that was how ultimately your notes as a clinician are recognized as part of the medical record for purposes of medical necessity. So we're going to have Bob Siggins from Austin and Byrd, our outside counsel, join us here just in a few minutes, and he'll go through the actual mechanisms. He's going to, like I said at the top of the hour, he's going to give a overview of the specifics, or the political analyst version of the different types of possibilities for the vehicles that we might be able to add our provisions into. So I will, knowing that we're gonna talk about that in detail around 1:15, I think he's going to be joining us. I will say that doesn't mean that we're not trying to get our hearings, and we're not trying to go through the subcommittee process as usual. We met with Energy and Commerce and Ways and Means Health Subcommittees staff. So we shared this during the committee's Advocacy and Action webinar as well, but they actually have staff that primarily work, hi Sam, that primarily work just on the pieces of legislation that are moving through subcommittee. And those staff are comprised of individual staff members that work in offices for the members that serve on those committees. But their primary job is to just work on legislation that's moving through at any point in time, and to be able to answer questions and request things like Medicare TA, which is technical assistance from Medicare. We have to have that for our bill to be able to move through committee. So while we're saying in this webinar today, while we're talking about the opportunities for us to attach our bill to something else, we are also at the same time working simultaneously to get it through committee as usual, as regular order. So the meeting that we just had was with one of those key congressional members on one of our committees of jurisdiction. We met with his health staffer, who is very knowledgeable about competitive bidding and the Medicare system and the DMEPOS benefit. Sam and I shared at the beginning of the webinar that we walked into the Rayburn building, and they had security set up, and at least they let us into the building, because we would have just been standing outside in the sleet and cold waiting to be let into the building. But we were able to go into the building and get through security, and then they ask you what office you're going to. The staffer has to come down and get you in the foyer, and then bring you up to the actual office of the member of Congress. So that's the security we're working with every time we go into the Capitol right now. So we walk in, this is a fun story. I've been waiting until Sam got on to tell this, because this is pretty wild. So we walk in, we're sitting, waiting to get our little badges so that we can move through the building without getting stopped by Capitol Police. And Sam's face just like, we were masked, and Sam's face just goes completely like, oh, and I see it happen, but my back is to whatever he's looking at, and I don't want to be weird and like just like turn around really quickly. So I slowly kind of look over my shoulder, and then I look back at Sam, and Sam says, "Did y'all see that?" And then I'm kind of like, "Oh, I didn't really see anything." I look again. Sam was like, "That was Carol Baskins, like Tiger King, Carol Baskins." So Sam, what, I mean, just describe what you experienced when that happened.
I mean, I feel like I've only been to the Hill a couple of times so far in my tenure, but for that to happen the second time, it was very surreal. I was just like, this is, you know, 11 a.m. on a Thursday, and I'm like seeing somebody that I just saw on TV a couple of, months ago when that second season came out. It's really good. But yeah, it was pretty wild. It was a good day.
So the highlight of Sam's day clearly is seeing Carol Baskins in the halls of Congress, but she was wearing a pink leopard sweater. So after
How
she
could
had
I
already
forget?
walked past me, and I was like, yeah, that tracks. Like that probably is Carol Baskins. And then she turned around and she was talking with Congresswoman Miss McMorris Rogers. And then I was like, oh yeah, that's definitely Carol Baskins. So the cool thing about the Hill being shut down the way it is right now is that when you're in the hallways, all you're basically seeing are people in groups like ours, so very small groups, celebrities, and members of Congress. So there are we saw 5 members of Congress today just in the hallway, which is not the way it normally is. Normally the halls are so packed. If you've never been to a policy forum, we encourage you to join us. At this year's policy forum, which I can announce the dates, we announced them at the leadership conference, and we will tell you now. Those dates will be May 16th for arrivals, 17th for the education component, and 18th for the Hill visits. So 17th and 18th are the dates to put on your calendar, probably coming in the night of the 16th. So that is May 16th through 18th. We're really excited about it. We're probably going to have to plan some type of hybrid meetings on the Hill also. So some offices may not be open to meet in person, but we might have their staff come join us over at the hotel. We're planning a really dynamic opportunity and to make the most of what we're going to do as an in-person event. Again, following all of the necessary COVID protocols, will absolutely be cognizant and mindful of those. But we're excited that we're going to be planning an in-person event for this year. So excited to announce that. Please mark your calendars. I'm sure our comms staff will be sending around a save the date very soon. Oh, we got a question, I see. Oh, great. Thank you. Appreciate that, Joy, for adding that into the chat, those dates into the chat. So I don't see, oh, there's Bob, yay! Awesome, perfect timing. So Bob, we just told a really great story where we saw, I don't know if you've ever seen Tiger King, but we saw Carol Baskins just now in Rayburn. Do you know who Carol Baskins is?
I know the movie. I wouldn't have recognized her name, but yeah, oh, that's just crazy.
Yeah, we just saw it. Sam had a total like starstruck moment. It was really adorable. Sorry, Sam, not to demean you, but it was a really.
I have a funny similar story. By the way, you don't see the stars up on the hill as much now with COVID, so you were lucky to kind of run into one. Many of you will remember this show, of course. Back in the day when I was working on the hill, you all know the show Grey's Anatomy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been on for like forever. So I was waiting in front of an elevator, and the guy at the time, a young African-American actor who was a big star on the show back in the day, and he was surrounded by people right outside the elevator, and I'm standing next to the group, and I had no idea who he was. And so the door is open to the elevator, and he and I walk in, and everyone else is going someplace else. So it's just the two of us, and we're going up from the basement of the Longworth building to the Ways and Means meeting room where he was heading in. And so he gets on, I get on, the door's closed, and I look at him, I say, I'm really supposed to know who you are, but I have to be honest, I don't know who you are. Can you mind telling me? Because clearly you're somebody famous.
Oh, that's
so he tells me, and then I go home and tell my wife about it, and she's like, oh my God, I can't believe you met him. So there you go. And you run into stars on Capitol Hill from time to time.
Yeah, we had to, both Sam and I had to rush back to make it for this webinar because, we were meeting with Congressman Latta's office just before this. So really grateful that you could join us today, Bob. For those who didn't join at the very beginning of the call of the webinar, Bob Siggins is with Alston and Bird. He is one of our primary external legislative counsel, working with us on our lobbying efforts on the Hill. So Bob's joining us today. He's going to give us the deep dive, as I referenced earlier, into those vehicles. So the opportunities that we might be able to take advantage of in getting the provisions of the Medicare O&P Patient-Centered Care Act attached to a larger piece of legislation that might be moving. And Bob, you can start with the February 18th continuing resolution.
Yeah, and let me just sort of to set the stage. It's probably Ashley talked about. You know, you have a bill introduced, but very little moves on its own in Congress. Certainly not much of consequence. You know, there's a thing in the House, the suspension calendar, they call it, where bills can pass with a 2/3 majority on their own. And that's usually things like naming post offices or resolutions and things like that. And over in the Senate, they do a thing called hotlining, which gets unanimous consent. But that's really for very non-impactful, not terribly controversial, small things. And most everything else moves as part of larger must-pass vehicles, things that like you really know have to move, and we're going to talk about those in the context of this. But before you can get there, you've got to have a bill, and there's a few things that have to happen and that we are well along the path with. You got to have strong bipartisan support on the committees that are going to move them. In this case, Senate Finance and Ways and Means, and we've got that. We've got great champions on the key committees. You got to get what's called technical assistance. This is from the agency that's going to have to implement this. Does this thing work in the real world? Yeah, because these are going to be the people who have to do so, and we've got that. We're working on getting what's called a CBO score, Congressional Budget Office, so you know the cost impact. We're working through that, and so you get all those things done, and now you've positioned your bill, you've got your champions, and now you need a vehicle to carry it. And we've got several potential opportunities this year. The next one that's going to present itself is on February 18th. The current spending bill, what's called a continuing resolution, which really just continues the previous year's spending levels, is what we're operating under, and that expires on February 18th. In other words, if we don't do anything, the government's going to shut down. So presumably something's going to happen. The ideal outcome there is a full year spending bill, a new fiscal year 2022 spending bill. And when you get that, you usually get a whole bunch of other member priorities that will kind of ride along with that. And that sort of presents the next opportunity for us. So we're in communications with Senator Warner and Congressman Thompson and our other champions. They're ready to roll, and we'll see if that vehicle takes shape, presents itself as an opportunity. The latest intel, frankly, is that it's probably going to be another short-term CR before we get to a full year spending bill, and therefore probably not else will ride along. But the next one will present a similar opportunity. So the spending bill must pass, got to be done. That's sort of one significant opportunity for healthcare legislation that can ride along. There's others that are coming along as well of varying certainty and varying size, but in the aggregate may well present several other opportunities. At the end of March, there's an expiration of a provision that was implemented in the previous spending bill that provided what's called sequestration relief for hospitals and other healthcare providers. It provided relief from a 2% cut, an automatic Medicare cut that was going to go into effect. And that expires partially at the end of March and fully at the end of June. And we all know since then, the picture has changed significantly with COVID and the Omicron variant, and hospitals are now once again hard hit, struggling with workforce issues related to, a high percentage of their staff being infected with Omicron, with all the stories we've heard about nurses becoming travel nurses and leaving and making 2 or 3 times as much money. And so we're once again in a position where healthcare providers on the front lines are in a tough position. And so there's every chance that Congress will take a look and say, yeah, let's extend that relief and provide some additional relief. And that becomes another Medicare policy vehicle, either at the end of March or at the end of June. and we'll see how that takes shape. There's one other sort of major piece of legislation that, again, is you have to do this year. It runs through Energy and Commerce Committee and the Senate Help Committee. So a little bit different from the committees we're working on, but there's overlap in jurisdiction, particularly with Energy and Commerce. And this is the Prescription Drug User Fee Agreement. Every 5 years, it's a negotiation of the fees that manufacturers are going to pay to FDA to help support all the approval processes and everything else that they go through. And it expires, and so it has to pass. And so there's a couple of other big things that could ride along with that. There's a pandemic preparedness bill that the Senate Help Committee is working on, and what's called Cures 2.0, which is another big thing that Energy and Commerce is working on. And there's a strong possibility that this becomes a large vehicle running through Energy and Commerce Committee in particular in the spring and summer. Another healthcare vehicle that can potentially carry Medicare policy. So that could provide an additional opportunity to legislate in our space. And then I would say lastly, lame duck. Lame duck in particular, I think there's probably a 90% chance as we sit here today that the Republicans, the control of the House of Representatives is going to flip from the Democrats to Republicans. And I think those of us who have lived through lame ducks recognize that there's often a lot of legislative activity in lame duck sessions. I mean, in other words, after the election and before the new Congress is sworn in, that sort of late November, December timeframe, when deals are made. You've got an outgoing majority that is trying to get some things done that they know they're not going to be able to come January, and an incoming majority that might want to clear the decks on some lingering business so they can get off to a fast start. And often there's a meeting of the minds. I remember in 2010, my boss I worked for at the time, Earl Pomeroy, on the Ways and Means Committee from North Dakota, had been defeated, and we were all out looking for jobs, and it was an incredibly busy session with all kinds of big picture deals on tax bills, et cetera. And we were just in a dead sprint for all of December on the House floor, and more got done in 6 weeks than had gotten done in the previous 2 years, frankly. And so that's not an unusual circumstance. All these vehicles I've laid out, we could see a whole lot of gridlock and less of it happen than we like, and then all of a sudden the dam break at the end. And that's not an unusual thing to have happen. And so lame duck could well provide a sort of a significant meeting of the minds on a bipartisan basis in strange ways that you'd never anticipate, where a whole bunch of Republican priorities and Democratic priorities that each side can live with get thrown into a bill, and then member priority bills get carried along. I will tell you from my discussions that, like, your bill fits into the category of what we call member priority bills. These are bills that members have been working on for several years in many cases. It's a big priority for, say, in this case, a Mark Warner and a Mike Thompson, two well-positioned lawmakers who have been pushing the committee, for a couple of Congresses on something, and are really looking for a vehicle to carry their stuff. And other members have other priorities. And it's been a long time since we had one. Last year was dominated by two reconciliation vehicles, the American Relief Plan in February, and then the second one was supposed to be the BBBA, and it hasn't happened. And that was going to be the bill that carried a lot of stuff for members, and it hasn't come to fruition. So there's a lot of pent-up ambition and desire among members for a bill to carry this kind of stuff. And so with all these different opportunities, starting with February 18th and running right through, November and December, 4 or 5 different potential opportunities, there's going to be a hard push by members for at least one of those, if not more, to carry bills like this. And so we've got ourselves positioned. We've got good champions. We're working through the final pieces that really get you well positioned, the last one being a CVO score. And we think with the drop shipping provisions in particular, we should be in pretty good shape there, at least to be budget neutral, and maybe even will be a little bit of a saver, which would really be helpful. But at the very least, we don't think we're a big coster. And so, yeah, I mean, I think we've got a bill that's well positioned with good champions and a whole lot of potential vehicles between now and the end of the year. And so I'll stop there if folks have questions or comments.
Yeah,
Or
I just
Ashley,
have
you want to?
Yeah, I have a quick question. So you mentioned this is a member priority bill. It's actually a question I had was at a dinner event with a congressman last night, and we always get to ask a couple of questions. And one of the questions I asked was, where do you think member priority bills are gonna live? I wanted to know, straight from the horse's mouth. And he said, well, there's a couple of opportunities, and he talked a little bit about some of the opportunities that you just highlighted. But he also said that members tend to be very reluctant. The reason it happens so at the last minute, the reason it's like 11:30 on the night before, and you got to say yes, let's go with this. Or, there's a lot of things that happen really down to the wire, is because members hold those priorities really closely. And if they think that it's the thing that they're going to attach it to is going to be contentious in any way, they don't want to have to vote against their own babies, right? These bills are that they are that they feel adamantly need to be part of our law, the law of the land. And so they're not going to put that piece of legislation, their priority language, into something that then they have to vote against. So a lot of times, I think, at least he was describing this dynamic where he finds himself in a position where he holds that stuff really close until he knows that he's going to be able to vote, at least be able to vote for his own legislation.
Yeah, and different members will be in different positions. For instance, when the spending bill comes through, Democrats are going to know they're a yes. Mike Thompson and Mark Warner, they're the majority party. They're the ones who are responsible for governing. There'll be no hesitation on their part. Now, we might have a Republican lead, as you said, Ashley, who's sort of like, well, I want to see what this thing looks like before I decide whether I'm going to vote for it or not. And as you said, that member may be less apt to be pushing from the beginning to get their bill in, because as you said, they don't want to get their bill in and then be in a position of voting against the overall package. And spending bills can be particularly they can be partisan. You got to get 60 votes in the Senate, but often the House, it's just sort of the majority's job to pass it. And so yeah, our Republican lead may be less apt to jump on and push. Some of the, there will be others. I think sort of the prescription drug user fee vehicle and pandemic relief and cures, there's a lot of bipartisan support across the board there. And to the extent they avoid contentious issues and really do maintain their bipartisan support, they could become, because the base bills, no one's against the user fees, and no one's against, the debate to get Upton bill and frankly pandemic relief, to the extent Senator Murray and HELP has got a good deal going with Burr. That could become a real magnet as sort of a non-controversial bill that could get 300 votes in the House, kind of, if it comes together. But you're right, Ashley, particularly if you're in the minority party and you might not love what's moving, you're not necessarily going to be wanting your priority bills sitting in there. I got you. That is a good point. Yeah.
I appreciate that insight too, Bob. Is there anything that, I know we talked earlier this morning as a group about the constituent outreach, and sort of now being the time that we're gonna maybe be asking those of you that are on the webinar today that have joined us and others in key districts to start making some very pointed outreach. So this is different than our grassroots, the AOPAvotes.org, where you send the form letter. This is more nuanced. This is more personal, and Sam and I are going to be helping kind of craft some of those messages so that our key constituents can reach out to those offices. Do you have any suggestions that might benefit the group to hear about constituent outreach at this point in the game?
The first thing I'll say is it matters. If anyone tells you it doesn't, they don't know what they're talking about. And also, it doesn't have to be 100,000 people or 10,000. It can be 3. If a health staffer is sitting at their desk, hearing from a few key people in their district, practitioners or whatever, and then going to the boss saying, hey, I think you should support this. The first question that the boss is going to ask is, have you heard from any constituents? And all they have to do is be able to say yes. I mean, they may not even ask how many, whatever, but if they've heard from, a couple of practitioners in their district in support of the bill, it's going to embed in their mind. And so first and foremost, it's that your voice is the one that matters. They like Ashley, they like me, whatever, but at the end of the day, they work for their constituents, and everyone kind of knows that that's the case. So your outreach is important and can be, make or break with certain offices. Beyond that, keep it simple. It doesn't have to be too complicated. It's just, hey, support this bill that does X, Y, and Z, and you've got sort of the top three. Addresses fraud, waste, and concerns problems in the sector. Makes sure that patients have access to the expertise of the practitioner that they need in order to properly use their device. Just simple, solid messages like that. You don't have to get deep into the weeds of the details of the bill. Just, hey, here's the bill, here's the things it does, and I'm a practitioner in your boss's district, and I hope he'll support it, or she.
Thanks, Bob. I appreciate that. And thank you so much for joining us today. I know that you have other calls lined up. So if we don't have any questions, Joy, can you see? I don't see any in the panel.
No, I don't see any either right now, Ashley.
All right, Bob. Well, you're off the hook.
My pleasure. Good to chat with you all. Take care.
Thanks, Bob.
Bye-bye. All right. Well, appreciate Bob joining us today. And I think we have our next announcement is, the next part is maybe the funnest part right now. Sam gets to announce our Advocate of the Month. If you haven't been attending our Advocacy in Action webinars, 2 webinars ago, we announced the first Advocate of the Month, and that was Dana Glover. And then last month, Brandy Brown won Advocate of the Month. And so, Sam, take it away.
All right. So, drum roll, please. Our Advocate of the Month for January 2022 is Mark Ford. And we really appreciate you. You were doing some kind of individual outreach that has been really helpful and that Ashley told me about. And also your work on the OPC committee is definitely much appreciated. So thank you, Mr. Mark. And we will be sending a gift card your way. We'll contact you with the details about that. And thank you so much for all of your help.
So I know that it kind of seems silly. I would say, like, looking at the names of the attendees on the call today, all of you are incredible advocates. You're very, you're engaged and you're involved. And this opportunity to highlight AOPA member really is about encouraging other people to join and be part of advocacy. Like Bob said, your voice matters exponentially more than ours does, even though we might have all of the pieces of the puzzle on our desks. It's your voice and your experiences that are going to move the needle. So we really appreciate your continued engagement and your outreach to your members of Congress. Thanks, Mark, for the note. We are so excited to continue to do these webinars. We have some fun topics planned coming up. We are also we've also moved this into our Government Affairs Committee on their work plan, so they'll start to be able to provide ideas for topics. But we also want to suggest that you all send your topic ideas our way. If there's something about O&P advocacy that you'd like us to explore and talk a little bit more about and provide more detail for in this forum, in a webinar forum, we would be happy to do that. So any ideas you have for topic areas, we'd love to hear from you all. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to Sam or to myself. We'd be happy to engage. Let us know what you're experiencing. Let us know the challenges that you're seeing in business right now, in your businesses right now, so we can also look at opportunities to develop policies that are going to support you and fix those challenges for you. All right. Well, that's all I have, Sam. Did I leave anything out? Anything that we were supposed to add today?
Not that I can think of. I think
Great.
you covered pretty much everything. Bob had a lot of nice things to say, and that helped me out a lot too, actually, learning some of his insights from his career as well.
Yeah, he's just a tremendous career. He spent many years on the Hill before moving out, in healthcare roles before moving out into the private sector. So he knows everybody, and he's a great addition to our outside counsel for sure. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your week and a good weekend. Look forward to seeing you next month. Oh, we got a question. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Aaron. All right. Bye, everyone.
See y'all.